No diet gets nearly as much praise from the mainstream media as the Mediterranean diet. But where did it come from? Where did it go?
Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
If you enjoy our content, please consider donating to us through Patreon or one of our crypto addresses, and give us a follow on Twitter and TikTok, all of which you can find in the description below. The origins of the Mediterranean diet are unclear. Throughout history, cultures surrounding the Mediterranean Sea ate all types of different diets. It's supposed to be modeled after the diets of Italy and Greece in the 50s and 60s. Today, many of the so-called health authorities will pin the health benefits of the Mediterranean diet on the fact that it's low in red meat, dairy, eggs, and sugar. But is this really the case, or is it another aspect of the diet? As Tucker once said,
Don't talk about dieting at all. Dieting is racist.
oh shit, wrong Tucker. As Tucker Goodrich once said, the dumbest thing about the Mediterranean diet is the idea that only people on that diet had low cardiovascular disease risk. In fact, everyone did. While heart disease became a global health issue in the 50s and 60s, it was nearly unheard of just a few decades prior, and it's obvious that not everyone was eating like the Italians and Greeks. It really started being studied rigorously in the 80s. While no one really agreed on exactly what it was, the key feature was the relatively low P to S ratio, or polyunsaturated to saturated ratio. These are two different types of fats, which slightly differ in their structure, giving them each unique biological characteristics. While the original Mediterranean diets did have a low P to S ratio, they were still pretty low in both of these types of fats. Many variations of the Mediterranean diet feature olive oil as the primary source of fat, which is high in monounsaturated fat, but also low in polyunsaturated fat. Polyunsaturated fats are the primary constituents of most modern vegetable oils, which we've been told are healthier than traditional saturated fats that come from animals and tropical fruits, and even monounsaturated fats like olive oil. In fact, while the Mediterranean diet is quite similar to the original American food pyramid, the most recent dietary guidelines explicitly state intake of saturated fat should be limited to less than 10% of calories per day by replacing them with unsaturated fats, particularly polyunsaturated fats. Cook and purchase products made with oils higher in polyunsaturated fats and monounsaturated fat, e.g. canola, corn, olive, peanut, safflower, soybean, and sunflower, rather than butter, shortening, or coconut or palm oils. This is despite these high polyunsaturated fat oils being relatively new for human consumption, originating back in the 1890s, back when heart disease was unheard of, but has been increasing in prevalence ever since. The first long-term study on this diet was one of the most important in history, the Lyon Diet Heart Study, which began in 1988. The control group received what was then the American Heart Association recommended diet at the time, and the experimental group got the Mediterranean diet, which set the standard for what the diet really was. Those on the Mediterranean diet ate a little bit more fruit, a tiny bit more vegetables, a crouton's worth more of bread, and a little less red meat, though both diets were abysmally low in this category for A&O standards. However, these changes were so minor that it's doubtful they'd move the needle much. The consumption of the oils was by far the most significant change, with those on the Mediterranean diet consuming more olive oil and less vegetable oil. This all amounted to the Mediterranean diet eaters reducing their intake of linoleic acid, the polyunsaturated fat most abundant in these vegetable oils, down from 5.8% to around 3.6%. The Mediterranean dieters did eat a little less saturated fat, but they ended up having the same levels of cholesterol as the control. High cholesterol is what many claim to be the problem with saturated fat. Across the board, those on the Mediterranean diet had vastly better outcomes than those on the American Heart Association's diet. They were about 70% less likely to suffer a severe heart attack, less than half as likely to die, and nearly half as likely to have any heart condition. So why did it work? Well, the second report of the trial was subtitled Insights into the Cardioprotective Effect of Certain Nutriments. They state, the study group in the Lyon study had a plasma fatty acid profile extremely favorable for protecting circulating or tissue lipids against oxidation. Oleic acid intake was increased, linoleic acid intake was decreased. This oxidation process is exclusive to the polyunsaturated fats. The same process that makes cooking oil go rancid wreaks havoc in your body. Despite eating the same amount of antioxidants, the control group ended up being depleted of them in the blood, since they were being used up to stop this process. By the way, the American Heart Association still recommends vegetable oils as the main fat source. What's important to note is something legendary researcher Christopher Ramsden of the NIH pointed out back in 2012. There are no studies evaluating effects on coronary heart disease of diets with linoleic acid intakes between 2 and 5% of calories, the advised cutoff. To put this into context, it is estimated the range of linoleic acid intake in the historical or evolutionary diets was around 2 to 3%. At the beginning of the 20th century, the linoleic acid intake in the United States was around 2% of calories. It is difficult to consume more than 5% of calories from linoleic acid without added seed oils. Ramsden would later go on to uncover hidden data about 2 other studies, the Minnesota Coronary Survey and the Sydney Diet Heart Study. His findings revealed significant reductions in heart disease and death after lowering dietary linoleic acid down to just above 5% of calories. What would the numbers look like if we were to compare an evolutionarily consistent diet of around 2% of calories as linoleic acid to the average American intake, which is around 8% of calories? So why does the Mediterranean diet work? Because it has a low amount of dietary linoleic acid. You don't need to do a Mediterranean diet in order to achieve this though. As Chris Ramsden put it, in fact, that is the amount of linoleic acid provided by virtually any whole food-based diet, whether it is meat-based or it is predominantly vegetable-based. Don't let them fool you. Subscribe to our channel.